When we picture the founding fathers, we usually see them in these grand historic moments. But what if you could follow one of their lives, not just through books, but through the actual places they lived? Well, today we're going to do exactly that with John Adams.
I mean, really think about that. Could you follow in the literal footsteps of someone who helped build a country? Stand in the room where they were born, and then stand at their final resting place? Is that even possible for any of the founders?
Well, for John Adams, the answer is a huge, resounding yes. It's pretty amazing, actually. His life story is so perfectly preserved in the places he lived that you can literally take a trip from his very first home to his very last. So, our journey starts right where his did, in a little farming town called Braintree, Massachusetts. This is where young John Adams was shaped into the principled and, let's face it, pretty ambitious guy he was. Okay, so let's get our bearings here. You can see his early life was all packed into this one little area. He was born in Braintree, went off to Harvard just down the road, came back to start his law career, and then married the brilliant Abigail Smith from the next town over. His roots were planted deep in Massachusetts soil. And here's something that makes him so human. Can you believe this? A future president, on his way to his Harvard entrance exam at just 15, was so scared that he almost turned around and went home. It's just a great reminder that even these giants of history had moments of serious self-doubt. And check this out. These were his homes. We're not talking about sprawling mansions here. These are classic, humble New England farmhouses. He was born in one, and then later he and Abigail moved into the one right next door, which is where their son, future President John Quincy Adams, was born. So as Adams' law career really takes off, he moves his family into the center of the action, Boston. And this is where his life becomes completely tangled up with the cause of American independence. And this really gets to the core of who John Adams was. On one hand, he was in Philadelphia, pushing hard for independence. But on the other hand, his belief in justice was so strong that he took on the most unpopular case imaginable, defending the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre, just to prove that colonial law was fair. Now, get this. Right in the middle of the war, Adams goes back to Braintree. He sits down in that same house where John Quincy was born, and he drafts the Massachusetts Constitution. And it's not just any document. It's the oldest functioning written constitution in the entire world. All right, so the fight for independence wasn't just happening at home. The cause needed support in Europe. So Congress sends Adams across the Atlantic, which would end up separating him from his family and his home for 8 long years. And boy, did he deliver. First, he gets the Dutch to officially recognize the United States, a huge win. Then, he secures these incredibly important loans from bankers in Amsterdam that kept the war effort funded. And finally, he helps negotiate the Treaty of Paris, the document that officially ended the war. This number here, 4, might not seem like a lot, but those 4 loans that Adams got from Dutch bankers, they were an absolute lifeline. Seriously, without the money he single-handedly secured, the American Revolution could have easily failed. After years apart, Abigail finally makes the long, difficult journey to join him in Europe. Can you just imagine that reunion? And then, imagine the challenge, representing this brand new country in the court of the very king they had just rebelled against. So after nearly a decade overseas, Adams comes home a hero. He's immediately elected as the country's first vice president under George Washington. This new chapter leads him to the presidency, and eventually to the final home he would name Peacefield. Even though he was only president for 1 term, he and Abigail hold this really cool distinction. They were the very first people to ever live in what we now call the White House, moving in while it was still basically a construction site. And on just his second night in this new, damp, unfinished mansion, Adams wrote this famous blessing in a letter to Abigail. It's a prayer that has really stood the test of time, a hope for the future of the country. That election in 1800 was one of the nastiest in American history, and Adams lost to his own vice president, Thomas Jefferson. He was so heartbroken, he actually left town before Jefferson's inauguration and headed home to his farm, which he named Peacefield. But thankfully, that's not where the story ends. A friend of both of theirs, Dr. Benjamin Rush, gently pushed them to start writing to each other again. And they did. What followed was this incredible series of letters that repaired their friendship and created one of the greatest correspondences in American history. So his final years at Peacefield were filled with books and family.
He sadly lost his beloved Abigail in 1818, but he did live long enough to see his own son, John Quincy, become president. And then, his own life ended on a date that is just almost too perfect to be true.
This is one of those historical facts that just gives you chills. On July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, to the day, John Adams died. And in this final, unbelievable twist, his last words were about his old friend, not knowing that Jefferson himself had passed away just a few hours earlier. So, after walking through his incredible life, we're back to that first question we asked. Of all these historic, important places, what can we actually go and see for ourselves today? And the answer is fantastic. You can visit basically all of them. The National Park Service has preserved his entire story in what's called the Adams National Historical Park in Quincy, Massachusetts. You can see his birthplace, the home he shared with Abigail, his final home, Peacefield, and even his gravesite. It is a truly unique experience. You can literally start your day in the small house where he was born, walk a few steps to the house where he drafted a constitution, go visit the larger family home at Peacefield, and then finish by paying your respects at his tomb, where he's buried with Abigail, John Quincy, and his wife Louisa. You know, when you stand in those rooms, you realize you're standing exactly where a revolution was argued over, where a family lived through the birth of a country. And it really leaves you with this one big, fascinating question about all the history that happened right there.